There are many opinions I have about Warhammer 40k that might be controversial, but probably the most controversial opinion that I have is that I actually don't think the Imperium of Man is doomed in Warhammer 40k, and I say this is controversial understanding why, and I know I'm going to be up against it in this stream, but I beg you, please give me a chance. For example, I will say I can totally understand why so many people believe that the Imperium of Man is understandably doomed. For example, if we turn our attention to pretty much any Warhammer 40k novel, we open with a passage that's generally speaking the same or pretty similar to this. It is the 41st millennium. For more than 100 centuries, the Emperor has sat immobile on the golden throne of Earth. He is the master of mankind by the will of the gods, and the master of 1,000,000 worlds by the might of his inexhaustible armies. He is a rotting carcass writhing invisibly with power from the dark age of technology. He is the carrion lord of the Imperium, for whom 1,000 souls are sacrificed every day, so that he might never truly die. Yet even in his deathless state, the Emperor continues his eternal vigilance. Mighty battle fleets cross the demon-infested miasma of the Warp, the only route between distant stars, their way lit by the Astronomicon, the psychic manifestation of the Emperor's will. Vast armies give battle in his name on uncounted worlds. Greatest amongst his soldiers are the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, bioengineered super warriors. Their comrades in arms are Legion, the Astra Militarum, and countless planetary defense forces, the ever-vigilant Inquisition, and the tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, to name only a few. But for all their multitudes, they are barely enough to hold off the ever-present threat from aliens, heretics, mutants, and worse. To be a man in such times is to be one amongst untold billions. It is to live in the cruelest and most bloody regime imaginable. There are tales of those times. Forget the power of technology and science, for so much has been forgotten, never to be relearned. Forget the promise of progress and understanding, for in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. There is no peace amongst the stars, only an eternity of carnage and slaughter, and the laughter of thirsting gods. It is perhaps the most well-known passage in Warhammer 40k, and it very much sets up this idea that the Imperium of Man stands no chance. And it's not just this passage on its own. If we take a look at the Horus Heresy itself, there's a moment towards the end where the Emperor of Mankind is temporarily able to leave the Golden Throne, to temporarily leave the Golden Throne, and so unfolds one of the greatest sequences in the setting. The Emperor in the webway fighting demons, fighting against the terrifying force that is Dracnian. And then he is successful, mostly, and is able to close the rift under the Imperial Palace. And in doing so, he does save Terra. But then the custodian Diocletian asks him, "What now?" And the Emperor says, "The war is over, Diocletian. Win or lose, Horus has damned us all. Mankind will share in his ignorance until the last man or woman draws the species' last breath. The warp will forever be a cancer in the heart of all humans. The Imperium may last 100 years, or 1,000, or 10,000. Come on, ADB. But it will fail, Diocletian. It will fall. The shining path is lost to us all. Now we rage against the dying of the light." In this scene, he is referencing the fact that Horus Lupercal and especially Magnus the Red's errors, let's say, have basically caused the downfall of the Imperium because they ruined the Emperor's Webway project. The project which would cut humanity off from being so reliant upon the warp. And so by destroying the Webway project, mankind will only be able to travel between stars by going through the warp, and that means that humanity will always have the taint of the warp within its heart, metaphorically speaking. And so Horus has damned us all. And this phrasing, "now we rage against the dying of the light," again, one of the most popular and well-known phrases in the setting, and often how people just refer to Warhammer 40k. If you ask someone what is 40k, you know, a lot of the time you will just get the answer. It is the rage against the dying of the light. And this is where it comes from. The book Master of Mankind, one of the most popular books in the heresy. And of course, we're not done. There's more quotes we need to look at too. When it actually comes to the Emperor's fight against Horus Lupercal at the end of the Horus Heresy, the end and the death, we get a really interesting passage where Horus is finally defeated and the Chaos Gods are thereby banished back from the Sol System, and they retreat, of course, to the Warp. And in that future, the old four will come to delight, for the quick death and sudden end they strove for here, and were denied, will be drawn out forever, instead across the infinite architecture of the galaxy, in one eternal act of worship to the powers they represent. For now, though, they scream. They gnash in anguish, thwarted and outplayed. They recoil in frustration, cheated and forsaken. They flail in pain, wounded and obstructed. Their screams of hurt and indignation are so shrill that stars at the hem of the Milky Way gutter out like candles. Their anchor is gone. The singular, perfect instrument they invested with their powers is destroyed. Horus is dead, and in the instant of his death, the grip of chaos incarnate is broken. The old four fall away, suddenly, hysterically, wailing in torment, dragging the warp with them. There will be a future now, in whatever unholy form it takes. So it was, Horus Lupercal was defeated by the might of the Master of Mankind, but the Chaos Gods, it looks like, are still going to get their victory. However, let us look at how bad things are in the Imperium first, and then we can go through them one at a time, and I can explain to you why, practically, despite the magnanimity, is that a word? Despite the gravity of the phrasing which Warhammer 40k authors use, I'm not entirely sure this holds up anymore in modern Warhammer 40k, for good or bad. So, I've primarily referenced the Dawn of Fire series, this kind of the flagship series of Warhammer 40k, to come up with these answers. But in terms of looking at what the greatest threats are to the Imperium of Man in modern Warhammer 40k, like 10,000 years later, 11,000 years later, there's a few things that very clearly stand out. We have the Great Rift. The fundamental fabric of the galaxy has been rent open by the Cicatrix Maledictum, this Great Rift which has sundered the Imperium into two. You have Imperium Sanctus and Imperium Nihilus, and other areas as well which are also kind of cut off. The enemy, the legions that oppose the Master of Mankind, and of course now his returned sons, Rabute Gilliman and Lionel Johnson, are literally described as a cancer by Rabute Gilliman, and the catastrophe was entirely orchestrated by the War Master of Chaos, Abaddon the Despoiler, who somehow came to understand that the Necrons and the Old Ones had had this ancient war 60 million years ago, and it was the technology of the Necrons which held the galaxy in check, refused to allow the warp to overwhelm our reality, and he therefore came to understand that by orchestrating the destruction of these ancient worlds that had Necron pylons on them, and then finally the planet of Cadia, he could allow this unfettered intrusion of the warp upon our galaxy. And this is a huge problem, because with the Great Rift in place, the light of the Master of Mankind, the Astronomicon, can no longer reach into Imperium Nihilus, and that means that on that side of the Great Rift, they can't travel sometimes at all, but at the very least very easily between stars, and communication is cut off, allowing the Xenos races that hate humanity, the forces of chaos, to carve up huge swathes of that part of the galaxy. It is the greatest cataclysm that the Imperium has ever faced. Furthermore, we have had things like the Psychic Awakening in Warhammer 40k. This is sort of, I imagine, connected to the Great Rift, but it's one of those things that's more in the subtext of the lore than directly said. But just as the the warp has grown in power and has now spilled out into the galaxy, this has also meant that we are seeing a rise of psykers across the Imperium of Man, both serving the Emperor and not. And quite frankly, either way is bad, because psykers who are unsanctioned can often be catastrophic for the Imperium. It is well known that during the Age of Strife, there were psykers of such great power, they claimed godhood over entire worlds. And that is why the Psychic Awakening is so devastating to the Imperium, because the Psychic Awakening that we saw in the Age of Strife is one of the 3 key components that destroyed humanity's incredible empire. Up next, of course, we have to talk about the great Xenos threats of the galaxy. Up first, we have the Necrons. The Necrons, the Silver Tide, awakening in untold numbers. The threat of the Necrons is also, you have to remember, like another threat we're going to talk about today, pretty new for the Imperium of Man. Though the Necrons had been sleeping for 60 million years, they were largely unknown by the Imperium, and even as they've started to awaken in larger numbers, the Adeptus Mechanicus, the forces of Mars, ever seeking to undermine the Imperium, it seems, had actually kept the true extent of this threat hidden from the rest of the Imperium. And it's only really now that Guilliman and many of the Space Marine chapters across the Imperium actually realize what a threat the Necrons are, and they have got a big aim and a big goal now that their king, the Silent King, has returned to the galaxy. They are building these pariah networks that effectively cut off portions of the galaxy from the warp, and this creates a stilling effect around them, making astropathic communication and warp travel impossible, creating huge, massive, pretty much unassailable strongholds for the Necrons. And Guilliman has had a confrontation with the Silent King, and in their confrontation, the Silent King says that he needs no allies in humanity. Despite the fact Guilliman offers essentially friendship, the Silent King is determined to either destroy humanity or enslave humanity. And in that story, we actually see void battles between the Imperium and the Necrons, and quite frankly, it's embarrassing. It's really not good. One of my favorite scenes, that they fire a Nova cannon from a Space Marine vessel, and in that fight, it said that a single round for this Nova cannon, an Imperium massive gun, I think it required the resources of half a planet to create or something like that. And they miss. They miss the Necron ship. And we get some good detail on why the Necron ships are so much more superior to the Imperium ships. They just don't have to worry about things like gravity and the way the forces of the galaxy work, let alone before we start talking about the fact that the Necrons have kind of time warping technology that the Imperium right now, it just doesn't understand. Up next, then, we've got the Tyranids. If you have played Space Marine 2, you might be very familiar with the Tyranids. The Tyranids are one of the greatest threats to the galaxy, perhaps the greatest threat. We actually see the Tyranids discover our galaxy in the Horus Heresy. This happens in the book Pharos, where at the end of the book, this essentially very powerful Necron device is overloaded by the Imperium to help destroy their enemy, the Night Lords at the time. And in doing so, they sent out a signal that actually reached this massive Tyranid force far out into the void of the galaxy. And this Nid force turns its head, faces humanity, and starts the long trek to our galaxy. And it takes them 10,000 years, but eventually they get here, and they are a foe to which, once again, it doesn't seem like the Imperium has an answer. They are bioorganic organisms. That's true. They don't have the living metal attribute of the Necrons, but they still have that aspect. They are ancient compared to humanity. They have fought countless wars before. It's kind of implied in the lore that they've conquered multiple galaxies and peoples before us. And they are also, like the Necrons, in numbers far beyond anything humanity has. There's even one quote that says that there is a high fleet tendril for every single system in the galaxy, and there are a million worlds across about as many systems in Warhammer 40k. There are some artist impressions of how large the Tyranid force is, and it basically engulfs our entire planet. So the Tyranids that we've seen so far in Warhammer 40k are basically thought to be scout forces in the Imperium, and once the rest of the Tyranids get here, it's gonna be bad. And then we have the fact that the Tyranids are able to evolve and create new beings to combat the Imperium's greatest weapons. So the Tyranid warriors that we all know and love to kill in Space Marine 2, it's actually implied that those were created as a direct response to them meeting Space Marines. They have incredibly powerful psycho bugs like the Neurothrope, and those were apparently created in direct response to them devouring Eldar Farseers. It's said that they are able to combat and create threats specifically to target certain enemies. We actually see, for example, the Space Marine Tigurius of the Ultramarines. He was an incredibly powerful asset to the Ultramarines in the First Tyrannic War. So the Tyranids actually created a beast known as the Maleceptor specifically to kill Chief Librarian Tigurius. That's how powerful the Tyranids are. And we also have this problem that we don't really understand the Tyranids in modern Warhammer 40k. High Fleet Tiamat is by far the most peculiar of all of the High Fleets, and it's probably the only one that really matters in the long run. And once again, they have created an unassailable fortress, basically, in the galaxy, in the Tiamat system. High Fleet Tiamat has been creating these massive towers on this planet, and we, to this day in Warhammer 40k, despite the fact that this lore is like 30 years old, we don't know what they're doing. We don't know why they're doing this. Is it some sort of avatar they're creating, a massive bug? Is it going to be something that could just wipe out humanity? We really have no idea. The Tyranid threat is massive and, quite frankly, unbeatable, it seems, in Warhammer 40k. We actually can't also skip over the danger that the Orcs pose to Warhammer 40k right now as well. I know that the Orcs are often talked about like they're a bit of a joke, and in truth, they kind of can be. So the Orcs definitely have this vibe sometimes, like they're the vermin of our galaxy. They are this race that exists in most corners of the galaxy and has to be exterminated with fire. It's very hard to get the Orcs completely removed from your planet because their ability to reproduce through spores is so effective at seeding Orcs across the galaxy. But as well as being this kind of vermin race, they are also potentially going to be the thing that ends us all. In one of the lesser talked about series of Warhammer 40k, we have the Beast Arises series, which takes place about 1,000 years after the Horus Heresy, and in that we do see the Orcs not only nearly win, not only do they nearly destroy the Imperium and take over Terra, but in addition to that, we see at the end of the series that this bad boy, Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka, is prophesized to one day come, and he does come 9,000 years later. So Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka, you can pretend he's a joke, but he has been prophesized to one day take over the galaxy, and he is essentially unique amongst the Orcs in that he is basically, he's described in the most recent Orc lore, the book Grotznik, as the bucket of the Orcs. You'll probably know that the Orcs are often talked about as they have this incredible Gestalt consciousness. If they all think the same thing, then that does have an impact on reality. So very famously, they believe that red makes things go faster. And because that creates a reflection in the warp, that then comes back and affects reality. And it does appear that red truly makes things go faster. And there are kind of crazy things in the lore that do happen. They often get memed on, but they're based sort of in truth, where there are machines that the Imperium just doesn't think should work. And they basically work purely by Orc will, is how they actually work. And Ghazghkull is a bucket for all of that ability, all of that joined psychic mind that the Orcs all have. It pools within Ghazghkull Thraka, and so that's why he is so powerful and so dangerous to the Imperium of Man right now. So we can we do treat the Orcs as a joke at times, sorry Orc fans, but at the same time they are genuinely a massive danger and they can't be skipped over. And there are other Xenos races as well that we can talk about. We have the Enslavers, we have the Tau, lots of other like minor Xenos races, but those are basically the big three. And that's before we get on to Chaos. Of course, we haven't really talked about Chaos, but Abaddon the Despoiler and Vashtor the Archifane, once again, they have they are working on something that the Imperium just doesn't understand right now. Abaddon has rendered the galaxy into two, but that's not his endgame. Of course, he wants to take over the galaxy. He wants to be essentially a new emperor. He is one of the Space Marines who believes that it was the Space Marines that won the galaxy for the Imperium, and they should be the people that run it. So he has joined forces with an incredibly powerful demon known as Vashtor the Archithane, who seeks to become the 5th Chaos God, and together they are seeking an ancient weapon. A weapon, it said, connected to the old ones, connected to the war in heaven. And should they get this weapon, it will lead to Vashtor becoming a 5th Chaos God and Abaddon's victory over the Imperium of Man. I can't give you any more information than that. We just don't have it right now. And the first part of their plan has been completed. With the return of Lionel Johnson, the Imperium's got a great asset, but the Dark Angels lost the Tukulka engine, and that was one of 3 engines that Vashtor needs to create a key and find a lock, and thereby get access to this weapon. It's all talked about in very vague terms, but we do know that Abaddon is working on something big to ultimately win the game. And quite frankly, this is the most likely answer narratively as to who will win Warhammer 40k, because the forces of chaos are generally referred to in the books as things like the great enemy. They are the arch enemy. Abaddon is the greatest antagonist of the setting, realistically. Even if at times it does look like the Tyranids or the Necrons are in a better spot. I'm not going to argue, I'll talk about this more later, but I'm not going to argue that the Imperium of Man is like guaranteed to win. But what I'm trying to say is that like the idea that you can treat the Imperium as down and out, I don't really think that's a fair analysis of Warhammer 40k. Guilliman's attempt to bring stability back to the Imperium of Man is also fraught with difficulty. Of course, the Imperium of Man is the bureaucracy-ist bureaucracy that has ever been dreamt up, and getting things done is a huge problem. We see in things like the Vaults of Terror series that messages for aid can come to the Imperium and take decades or centuries to get seen. For example, there is a request from the planet of Krieg that comes from when Krieg was basically a pleasure world before it had fallen into the catastrophe that we all know and love today. But the Imperium of Man is such it's one of its own worst enemies, realistically. That's kind of the point of the Imperium, and a theme that we see so often in Warhammer 40k. But ladies and gentlemen, today I will make the case that the Imperium of Man is not out. It can be saved. And the main reason I believe this is because there are so many unknowns in the Warhammer 40k canon right now that it is ridiculous, in my opinion, to come to the conclusion that the Imperium stands no chance whatsoever. Let's talk about some of the biggest threats to the Imperium. Let's talk about Abaddon the Despoiler. Abaddon, the Word-Bearers, in the Dawn of Fire series, the same Dawn of Fire series where the Imperium struggles time and time again, we can see they are incredibly worried about not just the Primarchs returning, but the Emperor himself. There is one unknown force in the galaxy that we have no idea how strong it is, and that force is known as the Star Child. The Star Child is the part of the Emperor's soul that exists in the warp, as far as we know. And we actually see its creation in the Horus Heresy. In The End and the Death, Volume 2, there's a plot line where the Emperor nearly continues, absorbing so much power that he would have ascended to godhood. But he is convinced to not accept this, to not ascend to godhood, because he needs to defeat his son as a man, and he accepts that. He ascends to God. He goes to face Horus Lupercal as a man, his incredibly golden majesty, still incredibly strong, but he doesn't accept godhood. However, before the Master of Mankind relinquishes the last remnants of this godhood, this Dark King power that he has attempted to achieve, he uses the last bits of that power to cut off a piece of his own soul. And he does so because he knows that when he goes to face the Lupercal, it will be incredibly difficult, not just physically or metaphorically or metaphysically, but emotionally. Horus is going to do everything he can to manipulate his father, as the Chaos Gods will. And he knows that there's a very good chance, because he's foreseen this, that even if he's victorious, he will be put onto the golden throne for 10,000 years or more in eternal torment. And so he decides to help himself, he will cut off these parts of his own soul. All of his love, loyalty, and compassion is said to have been cut off by the Emperor, and it drifts into the warp. Now, this was pretty much the right decision by the Emperor, because Horus does indeed try to manipulate his father, most principally with the dead body of Sanguinius. But those parts of the Emperor's soul are no longer with him. So when the Emperor actually faces Horus in the End in the Death Volume 3, we've got, 97% of the Emperor there, but part of his soul is gone and it drifts into the warp. Now, when it drifts into the warp, it actually stays there. And we actually see it go. Malkador sees it go. And he says it drifts into the warp as a child star, and it will grow just as the Chaos Gods grow. Chaos Gods grow through worship and through acts that empower them. The Star Child grows through worship to the Emperor of Mankind and through the acts that empower him. And so that seems to have been true. And the Star Child is referenced in Mon 40k as a potential rebirth of the Emperor. There's a myth that the Emperor of Mankind could be reborn into a child, and this child will be born with ancient knowledge and ancient power. And this would be the greatest threat to the forces of chaos. Now, as far as we know, that hasn't happened yet, but that force is still there. And it's incredibly powerful. The Emperor is the most worshipped being in the galaxy by far. And he is so powerful. In the story Godblight, we see Rabute Guilliman, empowered by the Master of Mankind, burn the Garden of Nurgle. I think it's almost certainly true to say that this is not the Emperor on the Golden Throne he's connecting to here. It's the part of the Emperor that exists in the warp. It is this Star Child part of the Emperor that the Dawn of Fire series tells us is responsible for the Legion of the Damned, is responsible for Imperial Saints, is responsible for resurrecting entire armies as and when the Emperor needs them. When Rabute Guilliman fights against his enemies, if anybody's got a killing blow on Guilliman, we literally see in the book the Emperor kind of swoop down out of the warp using his incredible power and save his son. So Guilliman and the Lion are largely untouchable. Even Angron can't kill the Lion. Like, that's a ridiculous feat. Angron is a complete monster who in the previous novel or previous book destroyed a planet. That's how powerful Angron is, with the power of Khorne flowing through him. But the Lion was able to defeat Angron largely because he's got the Emperor's shield. He has got the power of the Master of Mankind on his arm, and that means a lot. So the question has to come: how powerful is the Star Child? It can burn the Garden of Nurgle. Nurgle at the time is the most powerful of the four Chaos Gods. Their power waxes and wanes, but at that time we can be pretty confident Nurgle was the most powerful. So the Star Child, it seems to me, is more powerful than the most powerful Chaos God at any one time. Whether he's more powerful than all four put together, I don't know, but they don't often work together. But the truth is, we have no idea how powerful he'll become too. We don't know if he'll continue to get stronger. Presumably, he will do as more and more people worship the Master of Mankind. So we have this force in the warp, stronger than any of the Chaos Gods, in my opinion, and we don't know the full extent of that. So the question has to be asked: if something like the Necron's hive mind, if something like the Tyranid hive mind was ever able to reach the soul system in its, magnitude, in true force, could that hive mind overcome the power, the majesty of the Master of Mankind, the Star Child that exists in the warp? The truth is, we just don't know. And to say that the Imperium stands no chance is to tell me that you know that the Star Child is incomparable to the hive mind or something like that. And the truth is, I don't think we can make that decision. And the quotes I used earlier were sort of mischievously done by myself, because if we actually have a look at these quotes, and they are the most often used quotes in Warhammer 40k, we can be pretty confident that a lot of these are lies. There's a lot of things that are not true. This is the text we opened with at the start of the stream, and if we have a look at this, it talks about how the Emperor of Mankind kept alive by technology from the Dark Age of technology, that the Emperor of Mankind was chosen by the gods to be the Emperor of Mankind, These things we know not to be true, principally the Dark Age of Technology line, because the Emperor of Mankind is not kept alive by technology from humanity's Dark Age. He's kept alive by Xenos technology. These words are not the facts of Warhammer 40k. This is propaganda. This is a summary to draw you into the book, and it's only through diving into Warhammer 40k lore that you'll understand the truth. The Emperor of Mankind is a being that even to this day there are lots of things that we don't understand, but we can be very confident that this statement is not true in its entirety. And so the idea that the Imperium of Man, it means so the idea that the Imperium of Man cannot be saved, I'm not entirely sure how true that is. Then, then of course we have this lore that talks about how the Chaos Gods are going to go back to the warp after Horus is defeated, and the death of the Imperium is now going to be drawn out over a really long period of time. Most of this book really realistically is coming from Malcador's perspective, and you have to note that at this point in time the Chaos Gods do not know about the fact that the Star Child has been created. They do not understand the Star Child. Even the Emperor's even the servants of Chaos in Warhammer 40k don't understand what the Star Child is, and I imagine that when they find out just how powerful the Emperor will become, they're going to be very concerned. But even this passage on its own tells us that the Chaos Gods are not happy. They're not happy to oversee the eventual downfall of the Imperium of Man as it's drawn out over a long period of time. It's often, I think, misunderstood that the Chaos Gods are very happy with the current state of Warhammer 40k because, you know, they just get empowered by war, disease, decay, excess. But actually, that's not quite true. So the Chaos Gods all seek total dominion over all realms. Each one of them wants to conquer the galaxy in its entirety. And so the idea that they're happy with how things are is actually not true. If you own any like Warhammer rulebook or Demon's Codex, it will tell you that the Chaos Gods seek total dominion. And so they are very angry at how things are right now, because currently none of them is close at all to winning the Great Game. None of them is even near to winning. So the Chaos Gods are constantly going to work against themselves, and that will always play into the Imperium's advantage. Gerard. I truly believe that the Star Child was more powerful than all the Chaos Gods combined. He would have burned them by now, but he may be more powerful than one, but not all. Yeah, I think that's broadly speaking what I believe too. I think that, yes, the Chaos Gods altogether might be more powerful than the Star Child, but they don't team up very often at all. Like the Horus Heresy is really unique in seeing all of the Chaos Gods unite in this fashion. What makes Abaddon impressive as a leader is his ability to unite all these forces of chaos, and even he can't do it for very long. Like the forces of Khorne and the forces of Slaanesh do not fight alongside each other very often whatsoever. They're trying to kill each other as often as they're trying to kill the Imperium. Yes, and even when we look at things like the Tyranids, and even when we have a look at things like the Necrons, yes, it's true to say that Necron technology at the moment far supersedes the Imperium's technology. But just as we say, well, why hasn't the Star Child wiped out the Chaos Gods? Why haven't the Necrons wiped out the Imperium? The answer to that question is because they're not sure whether they can. In the Dawn of Fire series, it's heavily implied and thought of by the Space Marines that the Necrons behave in such a way that they are afraid of Rabute Guilliman. They're afraid of the Avenging Sun. And there's a reason for that. You know that big flaming sword that Guilliman wields? It's not just a big flaming sword. It grants true death to demons, but it also seems to have an impact on the Necron technology itself. Typically, if you kill a Necron, if they're powerful enough, they can be recreated on another tomb world that they control. But Guilliman's sword seems to circumvent that option for them. It is thereby possible that Rabute Guilliman, should he ever slay the Silent King himself, the Silent King is done. He will not come back. And as to the Imperium's technology, generally, one of the big changes that we have seen in Warhammer 40k today is the fact that the Imperium technology is improving. People like to talk about how the Adeptus Mechanicus, they never improve technology. They never move things forward. That's not quite true. The Imperium's technology does move forward. The view of the Adeptus Mechanicus is that the pinnacle of technology is what humanity has achieved during the Dark Age. And if you attempt to supersede this, that's when you're committing true heresy. But you can recreate old lost technologies, and humanity's power in the Dark Age, likely behind the Necrons, but still incredibly powerful. And given that we have things like the Pit of Raucus, this ancient warp rift, which has just been closed by Belisarius Cawl, that is going beyond even what the humanity achieved during the Dark Age of technology. In addition to that, we've talked before about how the Necron ships far supersede what the Imperium has, but we are currently, it said in the current lore, in a renaissance of Imperial shipbuilding, and thereby the Imperium is going to do what it can to fight back against this. Again, like I must stress, I'll repeat, and I'll repeat at the end, I'm not trying to make the case that the Imperium of Man is definitely going to win, but the idea that the Imperium of Man is down and out, that's what I'm going to fight against. And the idea, and we still have that vibe of raging against the dying of the light because things aren't looking good for us, right? For the Imperium. But I think it's more true to say that the Imperium does stand a chance. It does stand a chance. There are many unknowns in the galaxy right now, and things like the Star Child on their own could change the tide. As for the Tyranids, one of the things about the Tyranids to know is that we actually don't know how many Tyranids there are. The visions that we've seen are projections of how large the Tyranids can be, but the truth is that the Tyranids do keep losing. They lose over and over again. And even the Tyranid's greatest weapon, which is to strip a planet of all life, even that can be overcome today, it seems. We have the terraforming technology that we see in books like Death Welder. We have Belisarius Cawl seed worlds with new life, like what we see in Belisarius Cawl, The Great Work. Even our allyship with the Craftworld Eldari, or at least Craftworld Ulthwé, could be hugely beneficial to us because we see the technology of the Eldar god Vul being used to turn planets into paradises in the book Dominion Genesis. We are able to create more and more worlds across the Imperium and seed more and more life. And that's a huge boon for humanity in fighting back against the Tyranids, because if the Tyranids aren't as numerous as otherwise, then the Imperium of Man does stand a chance, realistically. Anyway, let me answer some questions. Big Monkey King, fans, GW sucks and they haven't done anything with the Lion since his return. GW hold my jeansy. Love it, love it. Gerard, I mean, time does exist in the warp with different laws, but we know it does as the cycles of the materium influence the cycles of the warp, waxing and waning of chaos, for example. Yeah, so I think that it's one of those plot devices where there is no time in the warp for the writers except when it's narratively convenient. You know what I mean? I thought Zeech was once close to winning, but then sabotaged himself from winning. They all have stories like that. They've all been the most powerful at one point or another. The Eldar gave birth to Slaanesh. Nothing says the Nids couldn't make the hive-minded god if they needed to. Nothing says it, but like I guess this is really what I'm talking about, is that we treat the Imperium of Man as if it's a settled issue. I guess that's more what I'm talking about. So like people that if you guys come to me and people that believe that the Imperium of Man is doomed, I won't really argue against you. I think that it's fine, but at the same time, I think that's perfectly fine to have that idea, but I wouldn't say it's a settled issue, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And the truth is that there are, things like the Star Child, things like exactly how powerful the Tyranids are, how far can we push humanity's technology. These are such unknowns. It doesn't really make sense to me to be so sure that humanity is down and out. The truth is that, Malkador tells us about how the kind of the end game of Warhammer 40k is for the two halves of the Emperor's soul to be reunited once more. and thus he could bestride the galaxy again. If that were to happen, if you had the power of the Star Child within the body of the Emperor, who knows what would happen to the galaxy? We just don't know how strong he would become. And you know, he could delete entire armies by himself beforehand. So exactly how strong he would be at that point, yeah, we just don't know. The Emperor of Mankind does seem to have things that he's planned for, that might still be able to save the Imperium. Because if we have a look, for example, at his last words to Horus Lupercal, where he says, "I wait for you and I forgive you," it does objectively imply that the Emperor does wait for Horus. Horus might be seen again someday. How that manifests and how that affects things, we just don't know. Why would the Emperor be bringing his son back if he thought humanity stood no chance whatsoever? And even when he speaks to Conrad Kurz in the story, The Night Haunter, he tells him that none of the demon Primarchs are beyond redemption even. So perhaps even like Mortarion, as he says in Godblight, could be cut out of Nurgle in some way. That's a crazy thought, but it's, perhaps possible now. With the alliance of the Inari, can't the Imperium get access to the webway? So that is true. Gaining access to the webway is definitely more possible now. The Emperor of Mankind purging Eldari at the time, so there's no allyship there. But I do think it's possible that their allyship with the Craftworld Eldar and especially the Inari could truly bear some fruits. So Guilliman in the Dawn of Fire series has become increasingly confident that the Eldar won't let him die. Craftworld Ulthwé, and in particular Eldrad Ulthran, who's probably the most well-known Xenos character, maybe, he believes that the Eldari's fate is tied to humanity's fate, and thereby they are going to work together. And so they are not going to let Guilliman die because he's the best hope for humanity. And in that respect, it is the case that the humanity's strength can be pushed even further as it combines with like Eldar technology. Further, we have got the potential awakening of the God of the Dead, Iniad, by the Inari. And although it's being stalled a fair bit, if they are able to get their hands on that fifth Crone Sword and Iniad does awaken, at that point you've got Iniad, the God of the Dead, slaying Slaanesh, and then you've got a new, like, massively powerful god in the galaxy that's capable of slaying Chaos Gods. I mean, things could turn on their head very, very quickly. Then, of course, we have to mention, this channel's favorite topic. We have to talk about the King in Yellow himself, right? In terms of the great narratives of Warhammer 40k, the King in Yellow is right up there. Dan Abnett is cooking something fierce in his stories. And in Beckwin Penitent, the latest Beckwin novel, we get some great deals on Constantine Valdor and how powerful he has become in Warhammer 40k. To answer that question, he is the most powerful person in Warhammer 40k, probably by a long way. To the degree that everybody in modern Warhammer 40k right now is trying to kill Valdor. He has got control of the Cognitae, one of the most powerful forces that was one of the most powerful forces of the Chaos. And then in addition to that, he's got enemies within Craftworld Eldar, within multiple traitor legions, and it's said that he has legions, like, rows and rows of enhanced and improved Space Marines, as well as a massive golden armada. The truth is that he has clearly done this for a reason. And Constantine Valdor in the Heresy sees what will happen to the galaxy. He sees what Abaddon the Despoiler will become, and then he decides to start his journey in creating this massive army, creating very unique and specific forces, putting grails inside of blanks, all this kind of crazy stuff. We don't know exactly what he's doing, but he has clearly got a plan in mind. And he is unlocking the secrets of the language of Annuncia. By the time we see Valdor again, if he has the language of the universe at his beck and call, who knows just how strong he will be? Could anything in the galaxy stand up to that? Even Horus Lupercal, at the height of his power, was knocked down by a word of Annuncia. And how much of it has Valdor got? We just don't know. So there are all these little unknowns in the galaxy where when I see Chaos Legions being, very concerned with how powerful Baldor has become, couldn't we really make the case he couldn't defeat one of them? But the truth is we just don't know right now. And I'm interested to see, I guess how people feel about this, because of course I totally get it's the narrative feeling that 40k is the rage against the dying of the light, but there are so many unknowns in the setting that I forever hold out hope. My problem with that endgame is that it would be a warp guard walking in the material realm, and at that point bring back Cain and Iliad into the Materium and unshatter the Catan. I mean, true, but to your question there, Ricardo, like, we're talking about an endgame. This is the end game. So we're going to have gods walk in the galaxy once again, and we're going to have dead Primarchs return to life and all manner of crazy things. And there is a god of the greater good. I mean, that's true. I mean, that's a fair point. Even the Tau, you could really argue, you're pushing it a bit, but you could really argue that the Tau stand a chance if you want to. And certainly that is the theme in which the Tau books are written. The Tau technology is constantly improving and getting better. Farsight is he is a very capable commander. And if we have a look at Shadowson's story, where she does get introduced to Tau Var, the god of the Tau, pretty much, Tau Var is pretty explicit in their desire to take over the galaxy and is able to dominate even Nurgle in one respect. So how powerful Tau Var will become, even the Tau could stand a chance. You can't. I think the setting is much more interesting if you at least leave these things open, because I mean, here's the thing. I talked about how there is this problem of, I understand why people feel like the theme of Warhammer 40k is the dying against the light. But the truth is that, in my opinion, Games Workshop had that theme for decades, and Warhammer 40k nearly died. Fantasy did die, but 40k wasn't far off. And it was only through the return of Rabute Gilliman and what I believe to be hope within the Imperium once again that actually the setting started to rebound and people were far more interested. I mean, I understand for some people they're going to love it, but realistically for most of us, do you actually want to read a story if the guys in it stand no chance of winning whatsoever? Like, maybe one story would be good like that, but every book, would you just keep reading? I don't know. I don't think so. How much will the squats help the Imperium win at all? Well, I don't know how big of a deal the squats will be in the long run of Warhammer 40k, because we don't know a lot about them right now. I do think Games Workshop are going to work to increasingly bring them into prominence, and they're most likely going to appear in the 500 Worlds campaign. I think the people are expecting an Imperium squats team up at least at some point. And squats technology does exceed Imperium technology in lots of ways. They have a lot of technology. It's kind of similar to Tau technology. So yeah, that is a big deal. But I guess the problem that I have is that I don't think their tech is powerful enough that it would be a deciding factor, like say Belisarius Cool's tech is like, turning the galaxy on its head. Absolutely agree with you. A setting in stasis dies over time. Things need to be in some flux. 40k is still massive. The setting in and of itself does not diminish just because things move. I'm with you. Yeah, I'm with you. And like, here's the thing. I really are. I'll stress again because of the YouTube comments that may come for me. If your argument is that you really believe Chaos is going to win, I think that's fine. I really do think that's fine. Likewise, the Tyranids or the Necrons, if you really want to. But so much has changed. Like, I'll give you another example, right? We used to say very often in Warhammer 40k, to Ricardo's point here, the Warhammer 40k is a setting and not a story. This kind of thing was thrown about all the time. People would say, when will the lion return? And people would go, oh, you don't understand. 40k is a setting, not a story. You can probably still find YouTube videos that talk about that kind of thing. But now Warhammer 40k is a story. It's moving forward in time. We're not in the 41st millennium anymore. We're in the 42nd. And so saying that Warhammer 40k is now a story, not a setting, means that, well, we used to say Warhammer 40k is just the dying of the light and the Imperium is going to lose. But to clarify, the loss of humanity was a guaranteed event to happen during the 13th Black Crusade. The 13th Black Crusade happened. It devastated the Imperium. But we're still going. We're still going. And now we've got Primarchs coming back. And so far, We've got Abaddon, who's maybe a match for a Primarch. We've got the Demon Primarchs, who keep losing and realistically won't be able to defeat any of the Loyalist Primarchs with the Emperor on their side. So, what's the great victory for Chaos here? Chaos's most likely victory right now is going to come from Abaddon and Vashtor's plan, but that's a new storyline. That's a whole new thing. And so the idea that the Imperium doesn't stand a chance, I'm not sure how much I buy that right now. Did you get your hands on the Carcharodon short story? I have got a copy of that. I will. So I've actually I've done a whole thing with some of the members where we were working on. We've got a whole list of the Carcharodon's origin story. I've got quotes from, I think it's something like 15, 16 books at this point that I think detail the origin of the Carcharodons and where they come from. And so I've got a lot of the members help me in voicing different parts of it. And that is something I'll put together next year and put up, because that is, I'm quite excited to do. And then yes, I have got access to the short story, yes, because it's actually quite interesting. This is what I was talking about with the same with the Alpha Primus lore. It's pretty big lore to put behind a paywalled short story. I thought that was a real dick move by Games Workshop. Please stop doing that. Do you think a potential death of a Chaos God is on the cards in the distant lore? I mean, even that, right? Okay. Rabute Gilliman says to Nurgle, he says to Nurgle, I will find you and I will kill you. You know, Liam Neeson style. He wants to come for the god of the Death Guard. You know, can you seriously tell me that, like, you think he's just being an idiot in that moment? Is that what you know? Because I guess this is what I'm saying, is that we don't know. Like, maybe Gilliman's just overconfident, and maybe he walked away from that and was like, Jesus, I don't know, just threatened a Chaos God. That was a nuts moment. But hey ho, it is what it is. But the truth is, we have no idea if what Gilliman can and can't do, especially with the power of the Emperor flowing through him. So it's a really good question. So could a Chaos God actually die? We don't know. We used to say there will never be a fifth Chaos God. It would never happen. Not only did we almost get one in 30k, we did get one in Age of Sigmar. There is a fifth Chaos God in Age of Sigmar, the Great Horned Rat. So the truth is, I mean, who knows, man? Who really knows? I think a death of a Chaos God seems less likely because Games Workshop want to sell the models. But again, we're talking about end time 40k here. So could a god die in the end times? Maybe. I don't know. Is it wrong that I want to know all about the Dark Age of Humanity and the War in Heaven? I don't think those mysteries are really crucial to the plot, so knowing about it wouldn't be detrimental, yeah? I think it depends. It depends on how and what you do, right? I think that's the issue. In terms of, like, people often say things like, this should have remained in the mystery, this should have remained in the mystery, but I will say chief amongst those things of things that should have remained in the mystery is the Horus Heresy. Horus Heresy is now the flagship series of Warhammer, and nothing comes close, and has launched its entire own game, making Games Workshop tens of millions of pounds. From their point of view, I don't think they'd consider the Horus Heresy a mistake. I just don't. I think you're really pushing it if you think they would do that. But things like the War in Heaven and the Dark Age of Technology, there are things that I'm not entirely sure you could write that would be satisfying. And therefore, I would probably leave them alone. But for example, certain battles within the Unification Wars, I think you could write, and I think that they would be totally justified. I don't think, for example, the Thunder Warriors have to be completely behind closed doors, because there's no real mysteries about the Thunder Warriors that I don't think could be explained. But I think battles between the Catan and the old ones, you could just never do justice to in the lore. I just don't think you could do. So hey ho, I think there are things like that are maybe quite bad from the Horus Heresy. So, for example, if you want to make the case today that the Emperor doesn't love his sons, I think you're pushing it. I think you're going to be able to convince me of that, because the Emperor's actions in the Heresy and the Siege of Terra very clearly to me demonstrate he loves his sons. So you'd have to like just say all of this was lies, all of this is not true, blah blah blah. And you're fine to do that, I guess, but it wouldn't really convince me. I don't think most people do. Cadia still stands. Fair enough, brother. I've got a wild idea the other day. Ooh, I got a wild idea the other day. Is there any chance Vashdor gets born after Kul's death? Kind of like Samus and Garrow? Maybe it's something like that. But I don't think so. I think because I don't think so because Vashdor, I think, was created from the technological innovation of humanity and other races. So there might have been a particular technological innovation that birthed Vashdor, and then expand on in the future. Like maybe the creation of the Golden Throne was the final thing that birthed Vashdor or something like that. Or maybe the biotransference of the Necrons was the final thing that created Vashdor. Yeah, you know, something like that. But I think that's more likely to be his origin. I love G-Man, but he doesn't have a great dueling record. To be fair, so I think that he's not talked about as one of the better fighters, but I don't think his record's actually that bad. He's never going to beat Angron and Lorgar together. But outside of that, I mean, yeah, him and the Lion, Kuz does have to run away. The Kuz does run away from them. Depends how you view things. But yeah, I mean, he does beat Mortarion. He does beat Magnus. He's got help, but he does beat them, Well, I guess he doesn't beat Mortarion in the duel, to be fair. The Dark King has emissaries, so he already exists as a god in the warp. He doesn't have true emissaries yet, though. I think people theorize that Samus is, but as far as we know, Samus is his own thing. Personally, I think the Emperor refused to love his sons out of past problems with love, but learned to accept that too late from the heresy and was already going too far. So according to Malkador, what happened was the Emperor created the Primarchs, never intended to love them, but was surprised by the fact that he did. And then he of course, grew to love his sons. Sliced bread, birthed Vashdor. Yeah, love it. Vashdor as the 5th Chaos God would be so good for the universe and a natural step forward for the Dark Mechanicum to rise with him as a force in the game. True, yeah. I think you could do some really fun stuff there. Anyway, I think we're going to have to wrap up there. But yes, this was fun. I appreciate I don't know what to do about this stream now because of course we got diverted a bit in the middle. Maybe I can cut that out on its own. There is there's a tool in YouTube. I'll give it a try. But yeah, anyway. I'll do a wrap up and answer a couple of questions and then I'll go off. So there we have it. That's my opinion. Controversial as it may be, I don't actually think the Imperium of Man is done. There are many things that people say about 40k as if they are set and sure, but a lot of them have changed. We were never going to get squats. We were never going to see the Primarchs return. We were never going to see the redemption of the Dark Angels. We would never see a 5th Chaos God. But slowly and surely, these things are all starting to change. And the idea that 40k is no longer a setting, it's a story. And I guess my only real theory is that now it's a story with hope. And of course, like anybody, I'm well aware that it's most likely going to end in a chaos victory. But to my dying day, I will put faith in the Master of Mankind's and but to my dying day, I will put my faith in the Master of Mankind and his inexhaustible armies. And I hope that one day we may see him bestride the galaxy once more, defeating the foes of humanity. Thank you so much for watching this live stream. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoy this kind of content, please do click like and subscribe, and you can even join the channel by clicking the join button on the page below. Get access to more content. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.